Good evening and welcome to our live stream this evening on Sunday night. Welcome to all of those who are joining us live and welcome to all of those also who are joining us on the recording. So we're continuing with our theme of 30 days and 30 Microsoft 365 tips for the day. So today we're going to jump away from Teams and SharePoint slightly, and we're going to take a look at something which is more of a staple, something more traditional potentially, and we're going to go into the world of email. So email is still widely used in a lot of contexts, even though lots of communication has moved into things like Teams and Slack and different types of instant messaging type scenarios. Email is still very widely used, and we know that we end up with those kind of bulging email inboxes that we need to kind of take care of and make sure that we kind of respond to those emails that are important and that we're able to weed out those that might not be so important. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at, in particular, shared mail. So where, for example, you may have a generic email address that is shared maybe between 2 or 3 people. Within Microsoft 365, there are a few ways to set these up, and each way of setting them up is important to understand because they work for different scenarios. So to be able to understand the differences between these are really important, because if you do set up a shared email and it doesn't, or it's not set up in the right way at the beginning, then it becomes very difficult for you to potentially manage that shared email. So I'm going to share my screen as you've become accustomed to now, so that we can go through this. Okay, and as I've done quite a few times here, I'm going to start with some Microsoft documentation, which will lead us nicely into a bit of a demo and a bit of explanation about each of the situations that I'm going to mention. So the 3 types that I'm going to concentrate on in this session are the Microsoft 365 groups. So this is one way of setting up a shared email. Distribution groups is another way of setting up a shared email. And the other one that we're going to use is the shared mailboxes. So I definitely have my favorite in most scenarios, and I'm going to explain to you why that is when we get to the end of the session. So stick around and I'll explain to you why I prefer one over the other in most of the scenarios that I deal with on a daily basis. So Microsoft 365 groups, let's go in order of this documentation here. So they're used for collaboration between users, and we've seen Teams and we've seen SharePoint, and Microsoft 365 groups are a way of controlling access, for example, to those kind of resources. So if you create a team, for example, within Microsoft 365, then in the background, you're creating a group, and that group generally will dictate who has access and who can do what within that team. So these are the Microsoft 365 groups, and a Microsoft 365 group can be given and is given a shared email address. So this is an email address that you can use to receive email into that group, and people who are members of that group can choose to manage that email in the way that they choose. So let's take a quick look at our actual group here. Okay, so a Microsoft 365 group, looking at email specifically, will look like these here on the left-hand side. So if you're a member of a Microsoft 365 group, you will generally have in your Outlook client, and this is what I'm using to demonstrate here, you will have these groups kind of underneath your main email or underneath any mailboxes as well that you may have access to. And these groups will excuse me, receive email, and you will be able to see that email in that group. Okay, so I'm just going to escape there. So Microsoft 365 groups, in terms of email, let's have a quick think about what we can do with email. So Microsoft 365 groups are generally automatically created without the ability to receive email from outside. So for example, in this instance, if I was to try and send to this group from outside, and this would have an @illuminoit at the end of there, then if I was to try and send to that from the outside, that would not be available, for example, for people to do that. There is a setting that you can turn on to say that you do want those groups to be able to receive email from outside. So that's fine, you can do that. So you can receive email from the outside as well on these groups, but you do have to just remember to switch that switch in order to be able to do that. So that's external email coming in, you are able to do that. And then in terms of the way email comes in, you can also choose whether you want it just to come into the group so that it looks like this. So I can see this in the group and I can see the messages here, but there is also an option to turn on to say, I also want a copy of emails to be sent to every member of this group. And that would not just put the email in here, but it would also send a copy of that email to everyone within the group. Now, I'm not a big fan of that. Because once you start sending copies of emails off to, say, everyone in that group, could be 2 people or it could be 200, it gets very difficult to manage kind of, who's seen that email, who's replied to that email, where that email is in the context of where it needs to be in terms of the process that it's trying to kind of get us through. So I'm not a big fan of that. But as I said, if you want to make sure that people in that group are seeing those emails also in their main inbox, then you can also copy that message to everyone in those groups. Okay, and then let's just kind of create a new mail quickly. And we'll send it to this group. And if we have a look there, so there's only one person in this group currently, so we can expand that group as well using Outlook and see who's in there. So let's just do a test here. And this will come in into our Microsoft 365 group here, or it should do anytime soon. This is one I did earlier, which came in straight away. I think it's okay. Let's try another one. Try that one. So I'm just going to send that one again. It's because I expanded the group. So instead of sending it to the group, it sent it just to the actual person that was in that group. So we're going to just do another one there. Apologies about that. So now if I go in to my group, you'll see that the email has arrived there. So I can see that this test email has arrived. I can do a thumbs up, I can do a reply, I can do a reply all, for example, depending on who's on this email. However, one of the things that, in terms of the reason why I don't particularly kind of like these Office or these Microsoft 365 groups for email, for managing shared emails, is because there's no way then to actually kind of create any folders underneath here or really manage the emails within this group in any kind of coherent way, in my opinion. So it's a bit more like a kind of chat functionality where you can see kind of when people are replying, etc., within this group. But if you imagine if people are also receiving copies of these emails going into their inboxes, then in my mind, it becomes quite difficult to manage email using Microsoft 365 groups. So that's the Microsoft 365 group. Now we're kind of time's running on. So I'm going to now move to the next one. So that was the Microsoft 365 group. So you can use it. It's not my favorite, to be honest. Distribution groups, again, so just go over this very quickly. So a distribution group puts more than, or kind of generally has more than one person in a group together. And when an email gets sent to that distribution group, it gets a copy of that email gets forwarded on to every single member of that distribution group. If someone from the outside, for example, sends an email in, they will get an out of office message, not based on the group itself, but they would get an out of office message from each of the people in that group who have an out of office message on. So it's not a great mechanism. For example, if you're using this for a shared mailbox for the outside, it's not a great mechanism to hide, for example, the information about who's inside that group. Because that person will get, for example, if they get an out of office, it will be the out of office of the person rather than the out of office of the distribution group. You also can't really you can't set up an out of office specifically for the distribution group. So this again is a drawback of the distribution group. And the other thing that I find with distribution groups is because a copy of that email is going to every single person on that distribution group, in my mind, it's really difficult to kind of keep track of who's responded to an email unless you do a reply all. And then obviously you're kind of multiplying your emails within your organization. It's just, in my mind, not a very kind of efficient way of managing email, especially when a group is involved, because as I mentioned, you just don't know who's done what with each of those emails, because everyone is doing it based on their own message that they've received in their inbox, and the other people within that group aren't really. So this is good for sending out information to a big group of people. However, in my mind, again, those kind of instances are kind of coming down when you need to do that, because you would use mechanisms such as Microsoft Teams or SharePoint or even Yammer to be able to share information, especially internally. But kind of you could use a distribution group to put a lot of external contacts in there potentially in order to get emails to them quickly. Okay, on to the next one. And I told you that I would tell you which one is my favorite in general. And in general, for most of the scenarios that I see where a shared email is required, I really prefer a shared mailbox to this. So multiple people can have access to that at the same time. So you can see here that Microsoft have already said, so such as company information or support email address. So everyone will have access to the same mailbox. They will see the same mailbox. And if anyone does anything with a message within that mailbox, that will be reflected for everyone else who's looking at that mailbox. So we can just have a quick look at this before we close the session for today. And these shared mailboxes again appear. So I'll just zoom in here. So this is what we see down here. And as you can see, it's a fully fledged mailbox. It has an inbox. It has sent items. I can also create things like folders. So if I, for example, have 3 or 4 people in that shared mailbox, we can create a folder and say, actioned. And then if someone in that team actions that email, they move it into that actioned folder. Takes away the confusion. Everyone knows that that email has been actioned, and it means that no one else is going to kind of go in and duplicate work, or even worse, kind of send the same communication again to someone that they're working with. Okay, so that was a whistle-stop tour, quite in-depth for some of those, but those are the main kind of things that you can set up shared email using. And just have a think before you do set these up, kind of what you actually want to achieve with that shared email, and then you can decide on the appropriate shared email to set up. Just going to remind you again of our website down there at the bottom. So head on over to our website, the address there, and you'll find blogs, you'll find resources, you'll find videos as well. And we're also kind of on our channels, we are putting all of these 30-day 30 tips into playlists so that you can find this information easily again. Okay, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Okay, see you then. Bye.